In today's podcast, I'll look at the ballad The Murdered Servant Man, together with the later rewritten version of the ballad The Constant Farmer's Son, a ballad of two lovers, deadly murder and a ghostly visit. Along the way, I'll look at the source and printing history and sing some of the various tunes linked to the ballads. In Strawberry Town there lived a farmer. He had 2 sons and a daughter dear. By day and night they were contriving to fill their parents' heart with fear. One night of restless slumber, a brother wakened from his bed. He heard the servant court their sister. He learned they had a mind to wed. I think our servant man courts our sister. I think they have a great mind to wed. We'll put an end to all the courtship and send him silent to his grave. That tune and words were noted down by Cecil Sharp in 1906 from George Whitcomb of Mere in Somerset. This popular ballad tells the story of a wealthy young woman courted by a servant whom she plans to marry. Her brothers plot and murder the servant whilst out hunting. The body is thrown into a waterless ditch and covered by bramble briers. That night her lover visits her in a dream and tells the girls the sad story of his murder. She searches the countryside until she finds the body and stays with her dead lover for 3 days and nights. The ending varies, with her either dying alongside her lover or returning home and denouncing her brothers. The storyline of this intriguing ballad can be traced back as far as the 14th century, when it appeared in Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron, written in the 1340s, a collection of tales linked together by an overall scenario of characters escaping from the plague epidemic, telling stories to pass the time. This tale, from Day 4, Story 5, set in Messina, tells of Lisabetta and the murder by her brothers of her lover, a young Pisan named Lorenzo. The story was probably well established as a folktale when Boccaccio included it in his collection. The storyline can be found in 2 distinctly different ballad forms, The Murdered Servant Man and The Merchant's Daughter, also known as The Constant Farmer's Son. Both seem to have had their origins in the broadside press. The earliest broadside versions indicate that the murder was located in Bridgewater in Somerset. As she lay musing on her pillow, she dreamt she saw her true love stand. By her bedside he stood lamenting, all covered o'er with bloody wounds. Pray, Nancy dear, don't you weep for me. Pray, Nancy dear, don't weep or pine. In that creek where there is no water, go there, you may my body find. Then she rose early the very next morning, with many a sigh and a bitter groan. In that creek where her true love told her, there she found his body thrown. The blood all on his lips was drying, her tears were salter than any brine. Then she kissed him, and loudly crying, here lies a bosom friend of mine. That tune and words were collected by George Gardner in 1907 from Mrs. Randall of Preston Candover in Hampshire. The Murdered Servant Man is essentially an English ballad and has been collected in its traditional form only in the southern counties of England within the 20th century. Just when it started its life as a ballad in England is impossible to tell. The main collecting of English songs and ballads started in the later quarter of the 19th century and was at its peak in the first quarter of the 20th century. The ballad was first collected in 1904 by Cecil Sharp from Mrs. Emma Overhears of Langport in Somerset. Her title for it was Bruton Town. I'll sing a full version of Mrs. Overhears' tune and words at the end of this podcast. Sharp and other collectors, George Gardner and Lucy Broadwood, noted several more versions in the south of England. We can assume that the song had a wide popularity prior to the 19th century by the fact that some of the singers from whom the song was collected referred back to learning it from other singers their parents and grandparents many years earlier. By the time the folk song collecting started in earnest in England, the song had declined in the repertoires of the singers. It has been collected in the United States of America under the general title of In Seaport Town, or The Cruel Brothers, and The Bramble Brier. Cecil Sharp collected several versions in the Appalachian mountain settlements in the early 20th century. They tend to be more detailed and probably date back to versions sung in Britain in the early 19th century. The song was most probably taken over by English emigrants and the British Army in the 18th century. However, there's very little hard evidence of this. Another printed version of The Murdered Servant Man was in Songs of the Open Road by Alice Gillingham in 1911 under the title The Break of Briers, a New Forest Gypsy Ballad. The song was still part of the repertoire of the Travellers in the 1960s and 70s, when Ewan MacColl and Peggy Seeger collected two versions, also in the south of England. One of the singers was the famous Caroline Hughes. A 19th century street ballad was printed by several broadside printers, including H. Such and J. Pitts, under the title of The Merchant's Daughter or The Constant Farmer's Son, and appears to have been a rewriting of the Murdered Servant Man ballad. It's of a rich merchant's daughter, so beautiful I'm told. She was modest, fair and handsome, and her parents loved her well. She was admired by lords and squires, but all their hopes were vain. She loved but one, a farmer's son, young Mary's heart would gain. A long time young Willie courted her, and appointed the wedding day. Her parents they did give consent, but the brothers they did say, there is a lord who pledged his word, and him you will not shun, for we'll betray, and we will slay your constant farmer's son. There was a fair not far from there, the brothers went straightway, and asked young Willie's company with them to pass the day. The day being gone, the night comes on, he said his race was run. 'Twas with 2 sticks the life did take of the constant farmer's son. That tune for The Constant Farmer's Son was collected from Maurice Cardy and noted by Thomas Woods. The words match the popular broadside printings. The storyline is similar to The Murdered Servant Man, except that the parents are quite happy with the daughter's choice of husband, but the brothers would prefer that she marry some local lord. The words of The Constant Farmer's Son, collected from the tradition, tend to conform with words printed on the broadside versions. They sometimes include verses associated with The Murdered Servant Man. It was first collected with a tune from Henry Burstow of Horsham in East Sussex in 1893 and was printed in English Traditional Songs and Carols of 1908, edited by Lucy Broadwood. There is a wide variation of tunes for The Constant Farmer's Son. Cecil Sharp collected 5 different tunes. Shepherd Hayden of Bampton, Oxford, used a variation of the Dives and Lazarus tune. The ballad was widespread and appears in many collections across England, Ireland, Scotland and the USA. I will end this podcast with a performance of the tune and words collected from Mrs. Overhears for The Murdered Servant Man. This version is known as Bruton Town. I'm accompanied on this performance by Nick Dow on guitar.
In Bruton Town there lived a farmer. He had 2 sons and a daughter fair. By day and night they were contriving to fill their parents' heart with care. One night of restless slumber, one brother rose up from his bed. He heard the servant court their sister. He heard they were in mind to wed. He told the secret to no other. to his own dear brother said, "See how the seven courts our sister. We'll send him silent to his grave." A day of hunting was prepared through thorny woods where the briers grow, and there they did this young man murder, and into a brake his fair body threw. It's welcome home, my dear young brothers, and what's become of me servant man? We left him behind where we were hunting. We left him where no man can find. She went to bed crying and lamenting for her own true love. And as she slept, she dreamed she saw him, all covered o'er with gore of blood. She early rose up in the morning, unto the yonder brook she went, and there she found her own dear jewel, in that same place where the briers grow. She took her kerchief from her pocket. She wiped the eyes that could not see, and to keep him from the burning sunshine, she covered him with leaves from off the tree. And since my brothers have been so cruel to take your tender sweet life away, one grave shall hold us both together, and along with you in death I'll stay.